handouts, because there are a couple handouts that will come with today's presentation. So again, my name is Franklin Escobedo. I'm the Community Services Director here at the Larkspur Library, and I'd like to welcome you. And then we're here today with Mamie Yee, a Master Gardener, and Bonnie Marks, a Master Gardener, who are going to talk to us today about 20 great plants for Marin to grow in your garden. So, or potted plants, right? Potted plants. I always get my things mixed up. So we'll just give it one more moment as people come into the room. Again, I'm Franklin Escobedo. I'm the Community Services Director here at the Larkspur Library, and we'd like to welcome you. And I'd like to welcome our great guest, Mamie Yee, a Marin Master Gardener, and Bonnie Marks, a Marin Master Gardener, and I'm going to hand this over to you, ladies. So I'll be in the background if you need me, so just yell out if you need me to help out with anything. So.
Perfect. So, and I'm going to go ahead and start my screen share so you'll be able to see our slides. So I am Bonnie, and Mamie, you wave so we know which is which. And we'll get the screen share going. And I'll pull up our first slide. Good, and we're good to go. So we also want to welcome you on this beautiful spring day where if you are interested in gardening, you're probably getting ready to be outdoors and be gardening at this time of year. And we're going to talk not just about plants in containers, but real specifically about native plants, because that's an interest that Mamie and I had as we became master gardeners and started working together on a couple of projects, including, growing edibles and things like that. But we both had a real interest in natives, and I'm gonna move forward. So some of you, if you've been to others of these talks, are familiar with Master Gardeners. Basically, this is a nationwide program, and in California, pretty much every county has a Master Gardener chapter. Sometimes it's multiple counties, and we are volunteers, so we do an extensive training program, and then our goal is to help answer questions and provide research-based information to help home gardeners. And we'll talk about a number of things. You've probably seen our booths at the farmers market. They've been gone for a couple of years, but they're back at some of the markets now. I know Civic Center, and Mamie, I think the Point Reyes one is getting started. I think you've been working with that group.
Yes, it starts in June.
So we're all looking forward to being out in public again in our post-pandemic times. One of the things that we worked on during the period that we couldn't be with the public was a complete revamp of our website. And so if you haven't been there recently, a great place to go to get information about gardening and to find answers to your garden questions is the Master Gardener website. The URL's at the top, but if you just Google Marin Master Gardeners, it will land you on this page. And among other things, there's an events calendar. So you can even see today's workshop is listed there. Some of you may have found out about it through the library. Some of you may have found a pathway in through our website. And in particular, if you're interested in more about native plants, we have an area on our website that is focused on growing California native plants and why you would want to grow them, some information about what the native plant communities in Marin are, and how to grow them from seed and how to care for them. And we'll cover some of that today with a specific focus on natives that you might want to grow in a container. The Master Gardeners have a help desk, and that also has been closed until fairly recently, but is reopening. However, we've been handling a lot of problems through a sort of virtual help desk where folks have been able to email pictures of plants or plant problems to our help desk. And if you go to our website, there's a connection to this page and a form that you can fill out and submit as part of the email process. So if you've got a bug that you've captured that you're curious about, or chewed up leaves, or a plant that's yellowing at the edges, and you can provide information, you'll hear back from a master gardener with some advice. The last piece that I'll talk about that's an in-person piece is the garden walks, and working with the Marin Water District and now also in Novato, the water district there, you can have 2 master gardeners actually visit your garden, do a walkthrough, look at your plantings. The primary focus is how to save water, and is another beautiful day in March, and we've seen very little rain other than those 2 early storms that came through in October and December. While the reservoirs have some water, if your garden is like mine, the soil is very, very dry because we've seen hardly any rain for January, February, and March, which are traditionally wet times of year. So we want drought-friendly gardens. And to set this up again, if you go to the website, there is a connection. I'm looking at the phone number. We just got a brand new phone number for the help desk. And as I'm looking at my slide, that's the older phone number. You could probably still get through, but if you go to the current website, there'll be a new phone number there. So the reason that we're here today, and we'll get back on topic now that you know something about master gardeners, is to learn about growing native plants in containers. So what Mamie and I will be covering today, and that's Ceanothus in bloom on the right. I think it's a dark star. We'll talk about what a native plant is. We'll talk about what difference they make, why you might want to grow them in containers. If you are growing them in containers, what are some good choices for planting, especially here in Marin? Kind of containers are you going to use to plant in, and what kind of soil do natives need? How is it different from other plants that you might grow in containers? How to care for them, because you want them to stay healthy and be healthy. And lastly, how can you find out more once Mamie and I are done and you want to continue to move forward? So for a lot of folks, the answer about what a native plant is can be a pretty simple one. It's a plant that really co-evolved over a long period of time in a specific place, and with whatever animals, the mycorrhizae, the microbes, the fungi that were in the soil. A simpler definition that gets used is what was growing in California before Europeans arrived. These are the plants that were not brought in from afar, but were local to the place. And we know from history, from traditions, and talking to natives, from what's found, that they really were a food source for the first Californians, and also used for livelihood, for medicine, and many other uses, the native plants of California. And they are the foundation of our native local ecosystems. So why might you want to grow California natives? I think a lot of folks have thought about it. Some are really looking at reasons like this. You want to have a sustainable garden. It's the cornerstone of what we at Marin Master Gardeners are using the term earth-friendly gardens. Sustainable and earth-friendly gardens. We already talked about the drought situation, and natives will demand much less water than non-native plants, although container plants will always need water. One reason natives would need less water is because they can put down very deep roots. And obviously in a container, you're not going to have plants able to draw water from 20 feet below your pot. So growing natives is almost always less work and less maintenance. They're naturally acclimated to our soil and our insects, so they have natural defenses. And so it's also less necessary to use chemicals on them. And so you can put away the bottles of sprays and let them be at one in your garden and depend on the native insects, the beneficial insects, to help protect them, as well as their own defensive. They create a sense of place so that your garden doesn't look like an English cottage garden. It looks like you are in California. And they're beautiful, so you can appreciate their beauty. And the last piece that we emphasize comes back to earth-friendly gardening, and that's to protect really the precious biodiversity that is ours. And biodiversity is a term that's been out there for, I think, about 50 years now, but becoming much more common. And it really focuses on things that coexist with one another in a specific area. So you'll have a plant life. That plant life will host certain bugs. Those bugs will attract certain birds and animals that will eat them, so that there's a collection of things that work together, and every area is unique, and every species in an ecosystem plays a role in those interrelationships. So Marin's blend is really the plants, the animals, the insects, and the microorganisms underneath the soil that pretty much only exist in Marin, or Marin and other parts of the Bay Area that would have a very, very similar climate. So we are inviting you to extend our native environment into your garden and help create what we call corridors for wildlife, places in between the native wildlands and the parks that we have so many of in Marin, to help tie those areas together with plants that are in your own yards. So why natives in containers? Mamie and I were part of a advanced training group, a guild in Marin Master Gardeners focused on growing natives, and members of the guild have to do projects together. And Mamie had proposed to me, you know, I've got some container plants in my yard, and it might be, I've got a dog here, so pardon the little squeal. That wasn't my stomach. That's the little pup. You might have, so Mamie had proposed it, and she was saying, you know, I've got these planters on my deck, and, you know, maybe we should see what we can grow as natives. So she and I teamed up together and started our research, and we realized there are folks who just have limited space in their gardens. So being able to grow natives in containers might be the best option for you. You might just be interested in growing natives, so you're going to dabble a little bit, but you can get some quick wins, just some things you can get going and very quickly see how they adapt. The first reason was the one that Mamie had brought forward, which is I'm growing plants in my containers. So, you know, why not go ahead and get natives in there so that people can appreciate them for their beauty, and I can contribute to biodiversity. Plants in containers are movable, so you can get something that's suddenly blooming and looks really lovely and put it in a featured spot in a front door or on a patio, and then when it's done with its prettiest part of the year, move it to a less visible part of the garden, or do what I do if it's an annual, and put it in another part of the garden so that it can just spread its seed as it dries out into that area and seed other parts of your yard with seeds that you've grown in your container plant. And again, the concept of creating small native plant islands, and we'll have some pictures showing that indeed this is possible, and that the little creatures can even find plants that are growing in smaller pots. So this is a part where we talk about what are some plants that might be good candidates for natives. And so you think of, well, what about, you know, the largest native plant in California, the giant Sequoia? Is that a candidate to grow in a pot? You know, it's almost seemed like a joke to me, but I did a Google search and I came up with a user on Flickr who is in San Diego, who's got a gorgeous specimen. Now it's not going to get as tall as the one that's growing in the wild, but he's had it for, I think it was a 5-year-old plant that he was growing in a container. So seemingly, you know, any plant well cared for in a pot. But here are some that we think are good choices for you. So we'll talk about succulents. We'll talk about ferns. Grasses. Many people, when they think of natives, are thinking wildflowers, but there's some beautiful grasses that lend themselves well to being container plants. We'll talk about annual flowers planted from seed and perennial flowers. And Mamie will explain a little bit about the difference between annuals and perennials. We'll talk about bulbs and rhizomes, plants that are growing and come back year after year with their sustenance really in a bulb or a rhizome that lives under the soil. And we'll talk about some shrubs. So we won't get into the giant trees. So many of you know about succulents because they are very low water plants. One of my favorite native plants is a succulent that's called cliff maids. It's a Louisia cotyledon, and cliff maids can grow in sun or in shade. They are wonderful plants for insects. The one on the left, I'm actually looking at its picture, and I was just looking at it yesterday because I've up-potted it into a larger pot, but it is blooming again 2 years later, and has been in bloom already for about a month and a half. So you get these beautiful flowers as well as a healthy green succulent that stays green all year round. Other succulents that folks are familiar with are the Dudleyas. So the two on the left, a giant chalk Dudleya and a Frank Renault Dudleya. And then on the right in Mamie's yard actually is a combination of a stone crop in the front. It's a sedum as well as the Dudleya. I was actually hiking yesterday in around Lake Lagunitas, and the sedum spathifolium there are beautiful. I was very tempted to take a cutting, but I'll probably have to ask Mamie for a cutting because we do not gather native plants from the wild. And if you've been reading the newspapers, actually some of the Dudleya that grow along the California coast, there've been harvesting and exportation of them, and there've been arrests made to protect them. Ferns are great because they grow in the shade. So you might say, oh, my garden's really shady. I don't think I can grow any natives. The Western sword fern that we see all over in Marin County is a good candidate for shade or part shade, as is the Maidenhair Fern with its just beautiful, delicate fronds. So a great plant for shade or semi-shade. Grasses, as I mentioned, and you can see here 2 containers. One is kind of an oblong, long container with a really kind of architectural form of a canyon prince wild rye, which is a great native grass and very hardy here in California. And then a leafy reed grass, the Calamagrosis foliosus, which has those feathery, beautiful little inflorescence. As you can see, is just stunning in a pot. I like to grow flowers, and I've been very successful with annual wildflowers. I grow them from seed, and Mamie has actually bought small plants of wildflowers and planted those. So the ones on the pot on the left and the right are, I guess, cousins of one another. The left pot is in my backyard. The right one is in Mamie's, and they're both a kind of Nemophila. The sort of dark periwinkle blue ones are called baby blue eyes, and the ones I've actually got a few mixed in the pot and in Mamie's pot. You can see how they get their name if you can look closely and count around the 5 petals. They're called 5 spot, each petal having that nice dark purple spot in the middle of the white. The yellow ones will come to very shortly. That's another native, and we'll see it in this slide. Those are called Tidytips. They're one of my favorites. They're kind of a daisy-like flower that have beautiful yellow blossoms, and they attract many insects. They grow in sun and part shade, and they're frequently used in butterfly and bee gardens. On the right in the hanging pot, you can see the Nemophila, and those are kind of fading. They're near the end, but the Calencia, the Chinese houses, are just coming into bloom, and they get their name. I actually have a second picture that I don't know if Mamie's seen yet. I've snuck one in because I went out 2 mornings ago. I've got these growing in the same pot where we saw the Tidytips earlier, but they're called Chinese houses because it's a sort of a pagoda-like structure to the blooms. Again, very popular in bee gardens, and full sun, mostly part shade being fine. The phacelias is another very popular plant in bee and bird gardens. They are deer resistant, which is nice if you're in a property where your containers might be somewhere where the deer are browsing nearby. The lacy phacelia in the pot on the far left, the blossoms are pretty small, but there are many of them. The pot, yeah, I've got some in a pot. That picture's from 2 years ago, but I've got a bunch that 2 days ago I looked at are coming into bloom right now. And then the 2 in Mamie's yard are a trailing phacelia and a Great Valley phacelia. They do like full sun. They can take a little bit of shade, but they're sun lovers. In parts of Europe, I've heard actually the lacy phacelia are often planted under orchards. So even though it's a California native, they're planting it there to attract the bees that then stay and pollinate the trees to help the Europeans grow their fruit. So it's interesting how something like that can cross to another continent and be widely used. Probably my favorite wildflower planted from seed are the Clarkias. The name means farewell to spring. So you can see that we're at the very start of spring now. Mine are not yet blooming, but they will probably start blooming in about 5 weeks. And even though they're farewell to spring, mine do continue to bloom into the summer. And I even in September was still getting flowers from the Clarkia amoenas. And the 2 outside pictures are in Mamie's garden in Point Reyes. The one, the close up in the middle is my garden in San Rafael. And we're going to switch now to perennials. So we're going to hear from Mamie. And so I will go ahead and mute my speaker. And Mamie, you can take off, and you can start by telling us a little bit about why perennial is different from an annual. So take it away, Mamie.
Sure. So perennials are flowers that last more than 1 year and actually last several years. For instance, the California cranebill that is on the right here, I think I planted that in 2017. So, and if you're on my deck today, it's still growing. So how many years is that? 7 years, I guess. No, yeah, 5 years. So perennials, so we'll be talking, are the shrubs. They usually have deeper roots. They're more sturdy plants, and that's why they can last longer. So, so these 2 are, we have the red-flowered buckwheat, and that grows in full sun, is deer resistant, and it attracts bees, birds, and butterflies. And in fact, it hosts 11 different butterflies and moths. The California cranebill likes full sun or part shade, is also deer resistant, and it hosts 14 butterflies and moths and is used in bird gardens. Okay. here we have a pop of color. Don't you love that red? The sticky monkey flower, it's used in hummingbird gardens. The California fuchsia, it likes, and this is from Bonnie's garden, by the way, and it likes full sun, is deer resistant, and it attracts birds, hummingbirds, and butterflies. So you can use those in those kinds of gardens. And the next one, please. Okay. So the red Monarda, or is also called the hummingbird Monarda, it likes full sun, part shade, is also deer resistant. It is a mint. These two are both mints. So they have aromatic leaves that you can sometimes smell, especially if you crush them. The Monarda attracts birds, hummingbirds, and bees. The coyote mint, and these are from my garden, likes full sun or part shade. Butterflies like I can't read my writing. Anyway, but butterflies like them. It's deer resistant, and they're used in bird, hummingbird, and butterfly and bee gardens. Very versatile. The next one. All right, these are all both from my gardens, and both of these I recently just cut off the dead foliage on them to make them look better. So the Burma Gold, it's native to California, but it's also native to half of the southern US. So it hosts butterflies and moths, so you can include it in butterfly gardens. The foothill penstemon, this one I think was a little nibbled on by deer. And actually, if you look, the light blue is Ethereal Sphere, another California native. And its common uses are hummingbird, butterfly, and bee gardens. All right. So these are two that you can use in the shade. The Santa Rosa alum root, it supports hummingbirds. The hummingbird sage on the left, it blooms from March to May. It likes part shade or full shade, and it supports hummingbirds, bees, and butterflies. So now we're going to move to bulbs and rhizomes. That Bonnie group. So the Ethereal Sphere, you can see it in there. It's, let's see, right there. Okay. Full shade, part shade, full sun. So you can grow that anywhere. Bees, butterflies like the flowers. Some mammals will dig up and eat the corms. So, so if you find your corm missing, that's what happened. The firecracker Brodia likes full shade, part shade, full sun. It's the only species in genus pollinated by birds. So it must be hummingbirds because it's such a deep flower. All right. Okay, here we have really beautiful Douglas iris. Comes in a variety of colors, not just this deep purple, but white, yellows, mauves. Is deer resistant, and it supports insects and moths, while the blue-eyed grass is full sun, part shade. It's also deer resistant and used in butterfly gardens. Okay, and now we're moving to shrubs. We have Dr. Heard Manzanita. It likes full sun, part shade. Hummingbirds and insects are attracted to its flowers, while birds eat the fruit. The dark star Ceanothus likes full sun, part shade, commonly used in bee gardens. Love Ceanothus. Okay, the next one. is a very popular one, and I have several of these in my garden, not in containers, but in my garden, is the red flowering currant. And it likes part shade. Hummingbirds are attracted to the flowers, and the bees eat, and the birds eat the fruit. And is host plant to several butterfly species. The blue sage, or the mountain desert sage on the right, likes full sun, part shade. Birds, butterflies, and bees like this. So these are just a few of the plants that you can put in containers. You can see how lovely they are when they're in bloom. So in planting, choosing containers for your native plants, pretty much you can use anything, but for the size, you should choose a fairly deep container that is 2 to 4 times the size of the original container, especially for perennials, because you want to give them lots of room to grow. For succulents, they prefer shallow pots, the same size or slightly larger. They tend to grow a lot slower. And you should plan to repot or amend or change the soil every 2 or 3 years. The roots continue to grow. So if you don't change it to a larger pot, you can root prune, and you do that by pulling out the plant, cutting off the outer ½ inch of the root ball, and then replanting it in fresh soil. Okay, the next one. Here you can be very creative because, as we said, you can almost use anything for a container as long as it has solid walls with good drainage hole. Glazed ceramic and plastic retain more soil moisture, so especially with our warm sunny days, you might consider that. Square shapes hold more soil than round shapes, and the pot location is a factor too. The more protected and cooler it is, it'll retain more water. But if sunny, you should avoid dark colored or metal containers, as they can heat up and kill off tender roots. You may put one container within another container, and that's another way of, if it's a really sunny spot, that's another way of protecting the plant and retaining moisture. Okay. Sodding soil, the potting mix. Drainage is very important. So for most natives, you can use a mixture of 1/3 pumice and/or red lava and 2/3 potting soil. Perlite can substitute for the rock, but not as good. For succulents, to that mixture, you add 1 cup of No. 2 sand or Felton sand per gallon, but not beach sand due to salt. Also, you might want to consider adding a teaspoon or tablespoon of time relief fertilizer like osmosite to a gallon container, and that will last you for 4 to 6 months. Okay, and we tried various things. So Falkirk blend from American Stone and Soil, I think that was Bonnie. Cactus mixes, especially for your succulents. I used Fox Farm Happy Frog potting soil, and Bonnie used some of her clay soil and mixed it with 50%, 50-50 with cactus mix, perlite, and some red lava. And others recommend that too. With native plants, just use the soil that you have and then add a little bit more of other things to it. Okay, watering. So Bonnie mentioned this, but because they're in a container, they're going to dry out. So you're really going to need to water them regularly, except for succulents. Succulents, I think you can water once a week or so. But the soil should be slightly moist at all times. Only top inch or two of soil allowed to dry between waterings. Water thoroughly or until water drains from bottom, and then you empty out your excess water because you don't want root rot. You don't let the soil dry completely, because if it gets too dry, it'll be harder to absorb the water. And if the soil does dry out, break up surface with fork or cultivator and soak until soil is thoroughly moist. My plants on the drip system bloom longer than the ones that I hand watered. So I think that has to do with the water, you know, how much water the plants got. And I didn't mention it here, but you, just like with houseplants, you can consider feeding them regularly. And when you do fertilize them, you fertilize them from fall to spring. And I don't know if you remember, but I had some penstemons on my deck, and those I'm gonna give them a little fertilizer today because they're looking kind of straggly. Okay. So now that you've got them in the pot, you've got them in the soil, you can add top dressings. And you want to do this to retain moisture, and you can consider the plant's native habitat in considering which top dressings to use. For instance, for woodland and riparian, you might use wood mulch and rocks. For desert or shoreline, you might use rock mulch or gravel. And then occasionally compost, because this does two things. It helps retain the moisture, but it also feeds the plant some. Okay. And we have a little video that will pull everything that I just, she may repeat things I said, but it pulls together everything that I just mentioned on how to plant in a container.
We're here at the Theodore Payne Foundation, and today we're going to be talking about potting up California native plants in containers. To begin, you would collect your materials, and here we have potting soil. For California natives, we recommend two types of soil, either our potting soil or cactus soil. Then you're going to select your plants, and we'll get to these guys in just a few minutes, but we will be looking at the size of your plants to your containers. And your containers, they can be ceramic, they can be plastic, they can be wood, as long as they have a hole at the bottom and you want to allow the water to pass through your containers. And then we will also talk about dressing here. So to start off, if you were to choose between these two plants, what you're looking for your container, and this is your container, is that it is double the width and double the depth. So if you take a look at this one, this is pretty much the same size as the container. And if you were just to drop that in there, there's no room for those roots to expand. So we're going to focus on this size here. And so as you can see, if you were to just drop that in there, it's going to go all the way down to the bottom. So what you're going to do is first fill your soil at the bottom so that when you plant your plant in your container, that it will sit about 1 inch, I use my finger, about 1 inch below the rim of your container. And then we're going to take this out. And if you'd like, you can give it a little bit of a massage at the bottom to loosen up the roots at the base. And what you're going to do is try to find that in the center. And again, where the level of that potting line is about one inch or half an inch from the lip of your container. Bring some of the soil around it to hold it in place. And then you can add more soil. And the reason why you leave a slight depth from the top of your rim to the top of the plant in here, it gives you a chance to work with your dressing. Then you also, like you do in landscape planting, slightly push and compress the soil around, make a nice flat surface. And so there you go. So at this stage, you would water in with the pail and watering it around let that water come through, and you'll see it actually come through the hole at the bottom. Once you got it really nice, then we're ready to add some dressing. There's a variety of dressing. We use a number of different types of rocks. They can be of different sizes. It's easy to pour. And what you're doing is just pouring the rocks around it. And what dressing does is help to retain the moisture in your container, because container plants actually dry out faster than them when they are in the ground, because they're out and exposed. And so the dressing can help with that, as well as be a wonderful decorative element. Knowing that these are red flowers, I really like the contrast of the peach color of the stones against here. And so then you have your dressing. I hope you found this information helpful. If you'd like to learn more about the Theodore Payne Foundation and about our classes, information about containers, check out the details section below. We're here at the Theodore Payne Foundation, and
All right, Mamie.
Okay, so this is your part, right?
Oh, either way, just you can see how well rehearsed we are. We did talk about some of what we learned. You know, I mentioned this was a research project, so you can say, oh, those were great pictures. Their plants are beautiful. They're master gardeners. They do everything perfect. But as you'll show, we actually did learn some lessons. We didn't do everything perfect. So one of the first things, and you heard the speaker from the Theodore Payne Foundation talk about even what she chose. I mean, I looked at the two pots, and that little one to me looked a little small for the container she was choosing. And the larger one looked like, oh, that's about the right size for that pot. But you do have to think of the room for those to grow. By the way, I noticed the first time I saw the video, that plant was the red Monarda, the one she was transplanting, which is the one also called the hummingbird Monarda. So you can see that these are plants that are root bound. If you look at the very bottom of the plant, you can see that the plants are, I've got a little visitor popping her head in, I think. Yeah, there's a granddaughter, so please, please forgive, but there's the curious gardener. So you can see that they are, in this plant, the roots are starting to twist around one another. The picture on the right, it's not a native plant, but it very much looked to me like an excellent example of a giant, giant plant, almost like an elephant's foot inside a kind of a teacup. It's definitely a case of the plant not being the right side. We talked about, in Master Gardeners, we always talk about right plant, right place. So you need to think about where that plant grows, and Mamie talked some, as did I, about which ones wanted sun or shade. So you can see that in the top left, this is a beautiful Dudleya. It was a Catalina Island Dudleya that I had for about 2 years. And in the winter, I had moved it into a sunnier spot. And we had, as we did last week, suddenly a day where it just got cooking hot, just, you know, zoomed into the 80s outside. And it was a couple days in a row and I wasn't paying attention. And I walked out one morning and this is what had happened to that native Dudleya. And I did move it to the shade afterwards, but it never recovered. So I lost that plant. A little difference with natives is you're planting for the season. And so people do talk about their concern about natives can start to get weedy looking. So when you've got something in a pot, I mentioned you can move it, but you can see that is sort of a beautiful hanging specimen that starts to get, as I say, these are Tidytips. So what we see down here are the untidy tips. So unlike a plant like a petunia that might last for months in a hanging pot, you need to be ready to move these somewhere else and swap in something else. So in this case, I had Clarkia getting ready to bloom, and I replaced that pot, just sat this in a back corner of the garden. And then in this case, I wanted to collect seed. So I actually spread paper on a table and just cut that mass off and let it dry. There's also a substantial amount of seed that had fallen in the pot itself. So, and then the right combination of plants. If you're planting a pot with multiple varieties, you wouldn't want to put, you know, say a native Maidenhair Fern with a Dudleya, because one wants a lot of water, one wants fast drainage and drier. So you need to think about both the shade and sun combinations that work for those plants, as well as the water needs when you're combining plants. And there can still be advantages. So those untidy tips and Nemophila that had died in that plant the following year, on the right, these are actually those little cute spotted leaves, like a spotted fawn. The baby leaves have spots on them, are the new baby blue eyes coming into this pot that had been planted by the seed that dropped. And just 2 days ago, I took another look, and you know, there they are. So you do have some advantages, and natives do reseed, annual natives. There are tidy tips in that pot also that actually this morning, a couple of these have already opened, so self-planted. And then we talked some about biodiversity. So Mamie, this is your yard. So maybe you can say a little bit about your beautiful view of Tamales Bay. Doesn't come with the containers, but and you talk about what's happening here.
Yeah, so we have some California quail, our state bird, visiting near the penstemons that, the foothill penstemons that I have on my deck.
We had talked about bees and what's attracted. So I mentioned the lacy Phacelia that's being used in orchards in Europe. So the one on the right's a little video that you can see of the bee that was there. And I had noticed a bumblebee. I always love to see bumblebees. So I noticed a bumblebee in the baby blue eyes. So I went to take this video, and you'll see that a little neighboring species came along. So we have a Carpenter Bee on the right. This is a California Carpenter Bee gathering the pollen, and the bumblebee on a potted plant. So it's not a huge field of Nemophila, it's a hanging basket, but we talked about small islands, so they found it. And this one really surprised me. So these are tidy tips starting to look untidy. This is the pot outside my kitchen window. And I looked up, this was actually taken through the glass. I looked up because I noticed some bird life. So they were actually dining on the seeds of the tidy tips that had gone to seed. So you can see these are actually the seed heads where they've been picked off or have fallen. So not a huge planting, just a 2-foot long wooden pot hanging on a balcony, and found by some hungry goldfinch that were enjoying them. This is the gratuitous grandchild picture, not the granddaughter who was just in here. These are her two younger cousins, but we think about going forward into the future, and the one on the left, her first flower word when I used to take her for walks when she was little was poppy, because she had discovered the California poppy. And they were here with me 2 weeks ago, helping me transplant my Clarkia into bigger pots. So they're going to be native plant gardeners as well. So I'll turn it back to you, Mamie, so you can talk about where folks can learn more about native plants.
Sure. So online, Bonnie pointed out that the Marin Master Gardeners has a wonderful website with lots and lots of information, just not only on native plants, but how to grow vegetables and whatever you want to grow. Then there's the California Native Plant Society. Marin has its own chapter and is quite active with plant sales in the fall and the spring. Cowscape, I think I have another slide on Cowscape, but a lot of the information that on the plants that I talked about, I got from Cowscape, and it's a great way to learn information about plants and also how to plan gardens with native plants. And then the Theodore Payne Foundation, the video that we saw from Southern California. And here are just some of a few books on California native plants. One that's really well known is the California Native Plants for the Garden, Carol Bornstein and David Frost. Designing California Native Gardens by Glenn Keeter and Ollery Middlebrook. The Drought-Defying California Garden by Greg Rubin and Lucy Warren. The California Native Gardening, a month by Mount Popper, and Growing California Native Plants by Marjorie Schmidt. And this is Cowscape. So if you put in Cowscape, this is what comes up. And you can see that we have 7,988 plants native to California. But if you put in Marin, that number goes down substantially. And we'll say which plants, grow best here. Tons of information here. What plants attract, companion planting, nurseries where you can buy the plants. Yeah, you can find all that information right here.
So this is just the sample page. If you were to have clicked on the Clarkia that was there, yeah, you can see its picture on the front, gone into annuals. And so the kind of information Mamie was talking about, this is like zooming in onto the page, including, which butterflies and moths are going to be attracted to your plant. Want me to do this one?
Sure. And then there's a Cowscape garden planner. So here you can, I think they ask you, the location of your garden, what you're interested in planting, what microclimate you might have. So you can find all that information under Cowscape garden planner, and it's tailored to your garden. So where you live and what you want to grow. So in summary, this is what we covered. What are natives and why grow them? And I think the main reason is the biodiversity. All the creatures that you bring into your garden. Why in containers? Because if you're like me and already have containers, why not grow natives and have even more biodiversity? You can plant just about any native in a container, and you can use a wide variety of types and sizes of containers and soil mixes, but you do need to water those natives. And yeah, we hope we shared with you some of the things that we learned and the joy and the discoveries from our growing natives. And as with Bonnie's pots, my annuals did reseed themselves too. And so I have 5 spots growing, and Clarkia is soon to follow them. So you can learn more because we've included couple of, Franklin was so nice to email you, I believe, the Yerba Buena California Native Plant Society, Natives in Containers. And this lists plants that do well in containers, as well as the Theodore Payne Foundation Native Plants for Containers that has a lot of the information that we had in our presentation. So, and then we have references, which we included here. So I guess we are at any questions. So Franklin?
Okay, so let me scroll back in the chat. So we do have some questions. I know some people were having sound issues, but we are recording this, so if you missed the beginning, we'll send the link out in the email. So one of the first question was, oh, it scrolled back down. Okay, so okay, are the baby blue eyes and 5-spot deer resistant? Are they sun or shade? So the baby blue eyes flowers, I guess.
Yeah, those are the Nemophila flowers. So, and I'm pulling up my notes because I did pull that information. So they're not deer resistant, and it's full sun or part shade.
Mm-hmm. You know, I have them growing in my, I have a section of a California native garden, and actually the Nemophila, they are blooming, and I have deer. Well, maybe there's enough other food for the deer, but they're not eating them right now.
So they're not a favorite. Yeah.
No.
Okay, so the next question was, when do you like to sow your spring annual wildflowers?
So the ones that haven't reseeded themselves, I usually, if I'm growing them to plant in pots and I can water them, I probably am seeding in late September. For ones that are being planted outdoors, I really watch the weather report, and 3 days before we're going to have a rain, or if we're going to have a light rain followed by a heavier rain, I really try to time it to when the rain's going to come, and so they can be irrigated by the rainfall.
So, and then someone was asking which ones were deer resistant. Right.
So we tried to, if they were deer resistant, we tried to mention it as we went through our talk, but the Cowscape site that we had talked about, you can actually go to that site, and when you use even the basic one that, that was the garden planner, one of the choices you can make is show me only deer resistant plants, and it will pull up plants for your city, your community that are only deer resistant.
Okay, and then someone's asked, are there any native grasses that are good for cats to eat?
I'm sure there are, since the elk were around eating native grasses for a long time. That's probably a better question for someone at Malt to answer. But I know the California purple needlegrass was one of the most common grasses. It's our state grass. And I have been at another presentation that have talked about purple needlegrass being good in cattle areas. There is also a California Native Grasslands Association that has a website, so you might see if there's information posted there. Yeah, great question.
So that's about this. We'll be sending out, so I know it went really fast in some parts, but we are sending out the recording so you can rewind it and watch it. And someone's asked, what fertilizers do you recommend for natives in containers, and at what rate? So I guess what rate should you fertilize, I guess, or?
Well, the Osmolite is a time release one, so that might be a good one to use, you know, because it, you know, lasts for a long time. But any organic fertilizer probably would work. I did I buy some osmolite? I think I just bought some osmosite. So that's what I'm going to put on my pedestal.
What I heard was to use, and that is one of the ones that's been recommended, and at a quarter of the recommendation for a non-native plant was what I have read. Yeah. Yeah, I haven't fertilized mine, but I use, the mixes I use have compost in them.
Right, so yeah, so I like to also top dress with compost.
That's all for that one. And then the handouts, I will send out the handouts again in the follow-up email with the link. Sometimes they do get stuck in my quarantine.
Okay. I'll sneak in a quick comment in that I had just gotten an email, but the Marin, California Native Plant Society actually has plant sales. They do a couple a year, and there's one that's going to be opening up on the 31st, I think. And then people will order online and they'll pick up their plants up on air the following weekend, maybe April 7th. So if you go to the Marin, California Native Plant Society CNPS site, you can look for plants. And I know she's got phacelias. That's where I got my first plants, were I actually from the Native Plant Society. So if you're interested in getting something to have ready soon, you can check their site.
Okay, and then these are the last two questions. Can I trim roots of a small potted tree, like shrub roots, to keep them small?
Yeah, I would think so, that you just have to be careful. It just said to do a ½ inch of the root ball, but yeah, to keep your plant small.
Okay, and the other one was, if I plant reseeds naturally in the pot, then the plant dies back. Do I need to water the pot, or do I just let the seeds stay dry in the summer?
Exactly. Just let them do what would happen in nature and let them stay dry all summer. And with the ones that I have, because of the kind of rain year we had, I did do some watering of them around the time that the rains would start to help them along. Yeah, ideally they would just sit out there and be dry all summer and then get watered by the rain and come back.
And then, so someone asked, what time of year would you suggest fertilizing?
Well, what I read was you do it in the fall to spring. So that's, when they're, starting to get growth. So you don't do it after, you wouldn't do it after they flower, I don't think.
And again, the fertilizing is really for container growing. If you're growing natives in your garden, I would just stick to a little bit of compost and not worry about fertilizer. And
there are some great, we did have a few workshops of garden talks. So if you go to our YouTube channel, you can find some of our older talks that we had. And there was a couple on composting and fertilizing. So there's some they're there on the YouTube channel for the library. So you check that out. So for that, thank you for the gardening. The Master Gardener members who are from other counties and other cities as part of the state. So there was one from Monterey and a couple other ones. So, but thank you for joining us. That was the last of our questions. So I'd like to thank you, Mamie and Bonnie, for joining us today. This was a great presentation. I always love hearing about the deer-resistant plants because I'm from San Diego and I'm so fascinated all these deer here in Marin. But thank you everybody for joining us, and we hope you have a great day. And we hope all your flowers turn out wonderful. So we'll see you later. So
thanks, Franklin. Thanks everybody for
thank you.